I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
All actors are kinda crazy, so crazy it's scary. That can be said for comedian Jim Carrey. He wiggles his body all over the place, and like rubber he can stretch his face. Jim Carrey is like a living cartoon. As a child, he performed for his family in the living room. Young Jim would stare at the mirror for hours to change his appearance. He wore tap shoes to bed in case he needed to cheer up his parents. When he was 10, he wrote a letter to Carol Burnett and asked to be on the show. He was so excited to get a letter back even though it said no. At the end of the school day, he would perform for his homeroom class. At the age of 14, his family lived in a van. He was homeless. He took off and moved to LA, and pretty much did nothing but stand-up comedy all day. His routine was an experimental attraction. He would do anything to get a reaction. On stage, Carrey showed off his comedic powers. He once battled a hostile audience for 2 hours. One time he imitated a cockroach for 15 minutes. He did crazy things like that. He can do impressions of James Dean, Jimmy Stewart, Elvis, and Jack. Jim Carrey perfected his craft at the Comedy Store. He impressed Rodney Dangerfield, so he took him on tour. Jim Carrey always dreamed of fame and wanted enormous wealth, so he wrote a $10 million check to his future self. This prophecy of fame came true when his career took off like a rocket. When his father died, Jim put that $10 million check in his pocket. The life of Jim Carrey is full of laughs and full of tragedy. He played a cartoonist in the sitcom The Duck Factory. Jim is always joking, goofing around, and kidding. He was in that vampire movie Once Bitten. And before the world got Jim carried away, he was in Coppola's Peggy Sue Got Married. Hooray! It is hard to say which Jim Carrey film is the best and which is the least good. He does a great impression of Clint Eastwood. And he was actually in a Dirty Harry movie. That's cool. He was in that other movie called Deadpool. It took 2 hours to put on the makeup for Earth Girls Are Easy. Next, it was time for Jim to explode onto TV. He was cast on the show in living color. They sure hired the right guy. Jim Carrey was the token white guy. Seeing Jim's wild characters sure was a thrill. Like everybody's favorite, Fire Marshal Bill. He was frustrated because many of his sketches were rejected or cut. So as a protest, he read a skit from his butt. He worked 16-hour days on In Living Color and wrote Ace Ventura jokes all night. He based his character's movements on birds of flight. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective showed the world that Jim was a strong comedic force. He did a lot of improvisation. But of course, it was difficult to control the animals during the sex scene. I bet. Jim had a personal chef for this movie. He also cooked for his iguana pet. Jim Carrey is always joking to get some laughs, and he was smoking in The Mask. The makeup took over 4 hours to apply. Because of Jim's flexible movements, they saved money on CGI. Jim Carrey is a movie star unlike any other. This yellow suit is based on one he wore that was made by his mother. In the movie Dumb and Dumber, he played a character named Lloyd. The studio did not want Jeff Daniels, but Jim Carrey fought to keep him employed. He had an old tooth cap removed from when he chipped it when he was younger. When Jim Carrey's on the screen, your laughter will boom like thunder. Also in Dumb and Dumber, he would improvise some more. Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all came out in 1994. Holy moly, Jim Carrey owned that year. Next, he riddled with the Batman to further his career. Yes, this comedian was in a movie based on a comic book. Jim Carrey helped design the Riddler's look. He sure is a funny dude. On set, Jim and Tommy Lee Jones would feud. Two-Face was just a Jim Carrey hater. Joel Schumacher said he would never work with Jim Carrey again, but he actually did years later. But if you're a Jim Carrey fan, I'm sure you knew all of this. On a Beatles tribute album, he sings I Am the Walrus. Jim does not like Ace Ventura 2. I enjoy this sequel, but what do I know? Remember that scene with the rhino? Mommy! Carrey actually doesn't like sequels. He's just not into them. Half of the $30 million budget went to Jim. Mr. Carrey is on a journey to make you laugh. That is his mission. He would write to Tupac to make him laugh in prison. Carrey is always hilarious on Carson, Conan, Letterman, and Leno. Once he pretended to be drunk on Arsenio. A palm reader told Jim that he would have all this success. He has a secret meditation spot where he speaks to Buddha, Krishna, and all the rest. Carrey is hilarious and rich, let me tell you why. He was paid $20 million for that movie, The Cable Guy. Jim Carrey's movies will forever flow through my TV cable wire. He was paid $20 million for Liar Liar. In this film, he playfully uses the claw to attack the kid. This is something Jim's father actually did. Carrey got so into character that he would go home with total exhaustion. Next, he did The Truman Show, another role to get lost in. Jim could really relate to Truman because of the paparazzi and his celebrity status. This film is a comedy with a touch of drama. It's actually one of his saddest. The Trumania bit was all improvisation. Carrey lashed out at the Academy because he did not get a nomination. But he did win a Golden Globe for Best Actor when he played Truman. People on the set were forbidden from mentioning Carrey's past silly movies because he was a new man. Jim Carrey calls this film a prophecy of what his life became when he felt lost and tried to escape his fame. The Truman Show delusion is a real mental condition. Director Milos Forman did not want him in Man on the Moon, so he had to audition. Jim Carrey owns Andy Kaufman's bongos, which have his blood, his DNA. Jim Carrey and Andy Kaufman share a birthday. He stayed in character as Andy Kaufman and Tony Clifton the whole time, the ultimate method acting lesson. Jim Carrey says this was not a performance, it was a possession. Carrey let the spirit of Andy Kaufman completely take control. The studio hid the behind-the-scenes footage for years because it made him look like an asshole.
Shut up! Shut up! He was supposed to come to...
To get into character for the first few days, he tried to only communicate telepathically. Jim even stayed in character around Andy Kaufman's family. He only answered to Andy, not his name Jim. Once again, he won a Golden Globe, but still no Oscar nomination. Jim Carrey acted like a wild buffoon. He yelled at and harassed everyone on set of Man on the Moon. But it's okay, cause he's deep into character, right? Occasionally his antics ended up in a fight. He was even sent to the hospital after starting a fight with a pro wrestler. Was it all a marketing promotional hoax, or was Jim really lost in his character? He played loud music and annoyed everybody. People who knew him said he was just like Andy. This is probably Jim Carrey's best performance yet. He brought the Hell's Angel biker gang to the set. He took off his pants and started dancing, and sent the real Tony Clifton to crash a party at the Playboy Mansion. Some say Jim took his method acting a little too far. He drove around with a bag on his head and crashed the car. With his wackiness, he makes statements that are very profound. He would pass out in other people's trailers and had to be carried around. Jim Carrey completely became the comedian who never told a joke. Because of this film, Jim Carrey started to smoke. Jim Carrey was so difficult that sometimes he wouldn't follow directions from legendary filmmaker Milos Forman, and after finishing the film, Jim didn't remember who he was at his core as a man. He was confused about his self-identity, so he did a comedy about multiple personality. It was another Farley film called Me, Myself, and Irene. No stunt double was used when he was kicked over the railing. Jim Carrey takes his comedy too serious sometimes. Next, he did a Dr. Seuss movie, That Guy with the Fun Rhymes. He was still deep in character as Andy when he had to audition, so he was caught in a pinch. Jim Carrey auditioned as Andy Kaufman doing an impression of Jim Carrey doing an impression of the Grinch. He became a Zen master in the makeup chair. He sat there for over 3 hours a day. Jim Carrey was taught torture resistance techniques from an agent in the CIA. This is a wacky movie about the holiday Noel. At Universal Studios, Jim chased tourists in a dress with a knife at the Bates Motel. Jim Carrey sure made an impact on showbiz. In The Majestic, he can't remember who he is. Jim Carrey's comedy was heaven sent. Bruce Almighty was banned in Egypt for sacrilegious content. He insisted on doing upwards of 30 takes. Jim Carrey is a comedy god, one of the all-time greats. He went on a mountain retreat where you can't speak for 5 days long. Jim Carrey performed on stage with Fish and Elton John. Carrey did Eternal Sunshine because his heart was broken at the time. Emotionally, he was under the weather. Director Michel Gondry loved his depressing look and told him not to get better. Much of the dialogue came from rehearsal improv sessions, in which Kate Winslet and Jim told real-life heartbreaking confessions. This is one of Jim's greatest dramas. He drove around in a bed car singing Elvis in his pajamas. Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind is a film about memory that everybody remembers. Jim Carrey talks about Jesus with ex-gang members. He has been on Saturday Night Live many times as a host. Jim Carrey stayed in the Shining Hotel and left when he saw his grandfather's ghost. Jim Carrey always gets interesting acting gigs. His Count Olaf makeup really scared the kids. His costume and makeup took over 3 hours to do. He based his character off of Orson Welles and Bela Lugosi too. Carrey was paid exactly $23 million to act in the number 23. This film even has its own conspiracy theories involving numerology. Before this film, Jim was already obsessed with the number 23. That's some insane shit. His production company is called JC23 Entertainment. If you want to make your movie funny, just let Jim Carrey cut loose. In Horton Hears a Who, he returns to the world of Dr. Seuss. He believes that Jim Carrey is just an idea. Jim Carrey doesn't really exist. Jim calls out red carpet events that are meaningless.
I wanted to find the most meaningless thing that I could come to and join, and here I am.
When it comes to outrageous silliness, Jim is the best man, and he actually said yes to everything while filming Yes Man. He really learned to play the guitar and speak Korean, and he did his own bungee jump even though the insurance company was freaking. Always saying yes can bring you joy, pain, or ultimate freedom. In this scene, Jim fell on the floor and broke his ribs. 3 of them. For I Love You, Philip Morris, he shaved his hairline back to get into character better. It's that prison movie where he falls in love with Ewan McGregor. He talks about exposing the Illuminati, but I think it's just one of his acts. Jim Carrey is anti-vax and bureaucrats. He played another Grinchy character who hates Christmas. He was Scrooge in that motion capture film by Zemeckis. Jim is a wild, spiritual philosopher. Hearing him speak can be trippy. Once he showed up at the MTV Movie Awards as some biker hippie. He has won 9 MTV Movie Awards, that's the most ever. Some people think he's kinda crazy, and some think he's kinda clever. He was in Mr. Popper's Penguins so he could dance like Dick Van Dyke. The Incredible Burt Wonderstone is a film that not many people like, but Jim is funny in it. He's actually a riot. To get in the right body shape, Jim underwent a strict diet. Have you ever seen Kick-Ass 2? There's a lot of gun violence, it's fully loaded. And because of that, Jim Carrey refused to promote it. Jim just wants to make you laugh, pure and simple. Dumb and Dumber 2 was released 20 years after the original. In The Bad Batch, he plays a hermit who never speaks. I actually didn't even know that was him, and that gives me the creeps. Jim Carrey has struggled through some hard times. He's in that crime thriller, Dark Crimes. Jim Carrey is like no other. He's now a painter. His works are vibrant and full of color. He uses these colors to consume his darkness and gloom. He has painted so much that his house has no more room. Jim Carrey has blessed us all just like his almighty friend. So I guess I'll end this now. Alrighty then.
Alrighty then. Alrighty then.
Alrighty then.